Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat. That game being Cthulhu Saves the World for the PC. Cthulhu Saves the World is made by Zeboyd Games, creator of Death VII and Cosmic Star Heroine. They are a two-person independent studio who makes RPGs, and I reviewed their game Death VII earlier July of this year. This game and Breath of Death both come bundled together for about $3 on Steam, and so I originally wanted to visit Cthulhu Saves the World pretty much almost right after Breath of Death, but there was a little bit, I kind of sidetracked a little bit, but now I'm here reviewing it. And coming off of Breath of Death, I was kind of hoping for a couple things. Some of the problems that I had with the game was I wished it was a bit more original and stood out a little bit more, a little less cliche, and had maybe a little bit more balance. And I can say that I was really impressed with how much Zeboyd was able to improve upon what they did in Breath of Death, given that Cthulhu Saves the World only came out months after that game did? But they really created an RPG here that felt way more unique and way more fun to play. This game is super cool and very addicting. I really loved playing through this game. So much so that I played through it 3 times in 3 separate ways before I even started writing this review. And in my Breath of Death review, I inaccurately called this game a companion piece. I thought it might have been at the time, but playing through this game, it's actually really detached from Breath of Death. In fact, there's not much references to that game outside of a couple of hidden boss fights and enemy descriptions. When approaching Cthulhu Saves the World, it's actually much more of an original idea, and thus I was able to get much more of a unique experience. So let's dive right into this and talk about why I really loved this game. First of all, from a visual perspective, I think the sprite work for characters and the environment looked so much better. They looked a lot more clear and defined and kind of detailed, despite having the same 16-bit aesthetic. Looking back on Breath of Death's look, a lot of the monster designs looked a little bit rough compared to this game, so I was super happy to see that. Plus, instead of the black backgrounds they have for battles, they now have actual backgrounds, depending on what type of... I bet it's what type of tile set that you're on that they determine that. The developers also put some time into their map engine, which they pointed out in their director's commentary of this game, which we'll get to later, where they actually added some layered tiles onto some of the world map, or some of the levels here. For example, in the very beginning of the game, you can walk right directly under a bridge. Breath of Death did not have this, and so what it adds to Saves the World here is it adds a little bit more detail and depth into the game, and allows for some more maze-like structures that Zeboyd can build within this game's dungeons. And so I know that's a small detail that some reviewers didn't quite catch, but I'm glad that I played the director's commentary and noticed that, because it's a very small detail, but I think it speaks to the amount of work that Zeboyd put in to make this experience feel a lot better than their previous experience that they delivered with Breath of Death. I'd also like to commend the music of this game. It's so good. A little fun fact about the music is that the composer of this game did the battle theme and the final dungeon theme of Breath of Death. That's stated in Breath of Death's post-mortem that is on Zeboyd's website. I didn't catch the name of the composer, but the work he did here is a lot better than what was just presented within Breath of Death's soundtrack. I think this soundtrack is a lot more detailed and interesting. There are a lot more epic tracks, as well as a couple more funkier tracks too. The sheer quality also sounded a lot better. There's something that I can't quite put my finger on, and that might just because I'm not really an expert in sound, but it just sounds like the music within this game is a lot more clear and defined than Breath of Death's soundtrack. Now, the story of Cthulhu Saves the World is really the bread and butter of this game. The story is very hilarious and absurd at the same time. In fact, in my opinion, it's even funnier than Breath of Death, because this game had me laughing from beginning to end. Seriously, from first joke to last joke, I really had a great time with the humor that Zeboyd presented within Saves the World. And there's a quote here I'd like to bring up from John Total Biscuit Bain from his WTF series, where he said, quote, "I could go through this entire game and not care about the combat at all, and just enjoy this stupid story. And I think for the story to capture somebody like him really speaks volumes to how well crafted some of the humor that Zeboyd presents within this game is. And so let's talk about the premise of the game. The game starts out with Cthulhu wanting to destroy the world. However, a certain wizard or magician puts a spell on him that prevents him from doing so. That is until he finds out from the narrator of the game, until he has done enough deeds to be identified as a true hero, and thus he will regain his ability to destroy the world. And I think that dichotomy there is just really hilarious, with such an evil creature wanting to destroy the world, but to do so he must help it first. And from that, as the story progresses, the events get more and more absurd. It goes from like clearing a tower of heroes, to liberating a town of zombies, to stopping an alien invasion. And it gets even crazier from that. And now a lot of the content of the game is based off of the works of H.P. Lovecraft. This includes the names of towns, or certain enemies that appear within the game, to even Cthulhu himself. The party members that you get in this game are also a lot more memorable and unique. You have Cthulhu, a merwoman who falls in love with him instantly, a sentient sword, a necromancer who practices for good, an alien cat, a magician with dementia, and a misunderstood dragon. And thus, with so many different types of characters, you really get a colorful cast of people here. And their personalities really come out with the chat command that they have within this game, that they did have within Breath of Death as well. But in this, I think it's so much more effective because you do have such varying party members whose personalities just bounce off of each other. Now, one thing I didn't take into account when reviewing Breath of Death was that the story relied heavily on referential humor, and that contributed to the standardness that I felt from that game. But in this game, because there wasn't so much of that referential humor, and because it was its own standalone humor, it felt much more original in execution. And I think as a player of games, I think I give referential humor a pass because it's such a common thing within the community. We like to reference our favorite things and laugh along with each other. But I do think that having such original humor like this is also a great thing to have. Now, did I have problems with the story? Sure. For example, the events within the game didn't really transition into each other, but instead would be a separate heroic deed that the party had to complete. And I think this made the game feel a little bit longer because you couldn't really feel progression within the story. You were just kind of wondering what heroic deed I would have to complete next. So I think the events within the story could have been written a little bit more cohesively and could have led into each other a little bit smoother. I also didn't like the trick ending they had at the end of the Innsmouth section, but I do understand that the ending they have was more popular in playtesting with players, so I can understand why they kept it in. Plus the ending that one of the bonus modes offers made up for this, definitely. A lot of what was in Breath of Death is in this game, Cthulhu Saves the World, although there are notable improvements. For one, they've added insanity within the game, which is a status effect that you can inflict upon enemies. And what it does is once you inflict insanity, the enemy's attack stat heightens while their defense lowers. And so I liked that risk-reward mechanic that they were advocating within this game. There was also much more of an emphasis on status effects within this game. In fact, one of the party members that you get in this game learns only status buffs, while another party member learns status debuffs. And so that allows the player a little bit more of an option on how they approach enemies. Characters can now also get passive abilities in this game. For example, Cthulhu strengthens with the more enemies that have insanity inflicted upon them. And these passive abilities actually help fix a problem that I had with Breath of Death, which was the MP balancing. In that game, the MP would be consistently low that you would regain throughout battles, but in this game, you can acquire a passive ability called MP Victory that allows you to have more MP when you win a battle. There are also more party members this time around, so you can switch out party members depending on the scenario that you're playing in, or what playstyle you want to test with. There's also an ability you get later on in the game to fly around the map, making it easier to traverse the areas that you haven't been to or that you want to go back to. Cthulhu Saves the World also introduces 1-ups to the mix, and what 1-ups do is that if you lose a battle, you can press, I think it's Control to restart that battle. Thus, you can freshly come into a battle that you lost, knowing maybe why you lost, and thus employing different tactics. I think teleporting is also new to this game, where every time you visit a town, you can then teleport to that town, also making it easier to traverse back into the game a little bit. Or if you've traveled really deep into an optional dungeon and don't want to go through it again to get back, you can just teleport to a town and refresh your stats at an inn. Cthulhu Saves the World also introduces a lot of replayability and variety with some bonus content that they have in the game. Score Attack is back in this game. They also have Highlander mode, where you can only play as one character at a time. They have Overkill mode, where the first enemy you beat bumps you all the way to level 40, thus you can go through the entire game without having to worry about the challenge if you want to re-experience the story. They also have a mode that I really like called Cthulhu's Angels, which is a whole entire campaign within itself with different dialogue and different party members. And that's the mode that has the different ending as well. I can't name too many games that give you a whole nother campaign once you beat its initial campaign. That's a really great way to give a player another reason to go through the game again. Saves the World also offers director's commentary, so anybody who is interested in the development of this game can select that right from the beginning and get some cool insights from Zeboyd themselves. Something that also boosted the usual fast pace of a Zeboyd RPG was the addition of running, which you can hold left shift and run around the map now. I don't think that was in Breath of Death, and so that was a really welcome addition. There were almost no problems that I had with the gameplay. I might have a nitpick here and there, like I think the game could have used some menu memory and could have streamlined its UI a little bit more, but I think that's all they are, is nitpicks. I don't think they really detracted from my experience that much. So in conclusion, if I really loved Breath of Death, then I really loved this game. This game was very close to getting like a 10 out of 10 out of me, but I think there are some problems that kind of bumped it down a score. But overall, I think a 9 out of 10 is still a great score and an appropriate score to give this game. I feel Zeboyd really improved upon the Breath of Death 7 formula, and delivered a much more unique and fun experience with Cthulhu Saves the World. I would absolutely recommend this to any RPG player. This game is super funny and hilarious. This and Breath of Death 7 are bundled together on Steam as well for only like $3. That's a steal. For two very quality games, I say go for it. I think Zeboyd absolutely deserves your attention, and I think they've got a lot going for them going forward. In fact, by the time this Thoughts video gets released, their newest game, Cosmic Star Heroine, will be released on the Switch, and I will definitely be buying it day one. I really want to see what more they have to offer, and what ideas they bring to the RPG genre. So, final word, definitely play Cthulhu Saves the World. It's great. So that concludes my review. If you want, like, comment, or subscribe. I also put my Instagram, Twitter, and my online portfolio down in the description below, so give those a check out. And that's really it. So have a great day, stay safe, stay healthy.